Welcome to Mastering Change. Today we're exploring the deep emotions of shame, how it influences our stories, our trauma, and our sense of self. We'll look at how understanding shame can be a powerful step toward healing and owning your truth.
That's right. Our guest, Annalie Howling, has turned her own experiences with shame into a movement for liberation. She works as an EMDR therapist, performance coach, and is an upcoming author, helping people recognize shame's impact and find their way to freedom.
Annalie shares her inspiring journey from trauma and self-shame to living unapologetically. Her work emphasizes compassion, self-awareness, and the power of rewriting our stories to foster resilience and authenticity.
If you're interested in understanding shame better and learning how it can be transformed into strength, this episode offers deep insights and practical advice.
Away we go. Annalie Howling, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, welcome. As our listeners will now already know, we start every episode of this podcast with a card game. Esther Perel's Where Should We Begin game has a number of cards in it, each with a prompt on it. And the idea is that the prompt will allow you to kind of lead into some sort of story, with the idea that stories are bridges to connection. So it will help us connect to you a little bit more and you to connect to our audience as well. So I'm going to pick one of these cards. I don't know what they've got on them. I will just pick this one in the middle. And it says, my favorite story of serendipity, ...
Oh, I love a bit of... Okay, first one's coming to my head. I was very close to my grandmother. We may or may not get into this. I had a very violent childhood. And my grandmother was my favorite person and like my safe harbor. And she passed away when I was pregnant with my daughter. And I always knew that that was sort of what was going to happen. I always knew somehow I was going to have a girl. I just knew. And I also knew the moment she passed, she'd been quite unwell. She was on end of life care at this point. And actually I was on my baby moon in the Middle East. I've just flown back from here, gave serendipity. I was in Dubai. I've just flown back from there today. And I remember taking a picture of the sky. I just knew. I had this feeling wash over me. I knew that's the moment she'd gone. And sure enough, then the text came through an hour or so later. Anyway, fast forward, I'm in the car with my daughter. She's little and she'd been at her sort of reception class school. And she said, oh, mummy. One of her best friends, Delphine got a feather today from your mummy's mummy. And I was like, right, okay. And she said, yeah, your mummy's mummy gave Delphine a feather to give to say to you. And I was like, right, okay. And I had this feeling, I was just like, oh my goodness, what time of year is it? It was 5 years to the day that she passed away. And we've never talked about, we talked about a few pets that have gone to heaven at this point. She was literally, just coming up for 5. My daughter was born in the June. This was the March. And it was and I just knew it. I got back and I went to look through my phone for that photo of the sky. And it was exactly 5 years to the day. And so that is my favourite story of serendipity.
Wow, that's unbelievable. And I mean, is your daughter still in touch with Delphine?
Yeah, they're still really good friends. And funnily enough, I told her mum, I said, I really like her mum. I said, I've got to tell you about this. It just blew my mind. And then she had a similar experience where her mum had sadly passed away a few years before, and they were very, very close. She'd put on her mum's sort of a memorial at the crematorium, this kind of almost like a key ring, like something little, because she can't leave big things there. And she had one herself on the kitchen notice board, and they weren't able to go during COVID to her mum's grave that year. And it was maybe a year or two after. So I mean, it had been in there for a really long time. So she buried it right down so people wouldn't take it or it wouldn't blow away. And that same weekend they went to visit, because it had been Mothering Sunday as well. It was on the top. So yes, it was quite a spooky time, but that is my favourite story of serendipity.
I mean, I really believe in kind of messages and something more out there. I think I really do. There's a way of connecting if we're open to it as well. That's the thing. And I think maybe children are more open to it. Maybe they see more things. I don't know. But yeah, that's lovely. I'm glad she was able to pass on that message for you.
So if you wouldn't mind, Annalie, please if you wouldn't mind saying your name and then introduce yourself in your words and in relation to your work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so Annalie Howling, I've known about yourselves for quite a long time. I'm a huge fan of the work that you do in this space. I'm an EMDR therapist. I'm a performance coach. I work with Olympians that are in the sort of 2024 Paris Olympics, professional golfers, tennis players, and then the elite athletes in the corporate world as well. And I also work with beautiful people, humans that have had terrible experiences and awful things that have happened to them in the trauma space. And then most recently, I am stepping into the role. I'm still sort of trying it on, of being an author. I mean, it's real. The book comes out in 2 months, 2 months time, but it's still me kind of transitioning into this role of owning that space myself. Unapologetic, which comes out on the 13th of May, which is all about shame. And we may or may not get into that, but I've given shame a voice. It's my stories. I had a lot of shame, and now I believe I'm shame free. I self-harmed. I go into a lot of detail about the violence in my childhood. And then I have really incredible survivor stories, the most brave, amazing stories about how shame had affected individuals, and then what happened to them as subsequently from those events and traumatic events. And the shame is a stain that's left behind from trauma often. And then I have expert interview as well, kind of debunking or even just questioning some of the patriarchal structures that shame is really supported by, and starting a conversation. So that's me.
So I think that's a good place to start, if I'm honest. I'd really love to understand shame in the context of trauma, but also maybe start with that kind of macro lens of how you define shame and how you recognize shame.
So shame to me, and people that obviously do a lot of work in the space and EMDR, it's the underlying limiting belief. It's the I am. Shame is a felt sense. It's really hard to talk about shame, actually. It's hard to put shame into words. My editor was like, I think you started a new genre because no one's really spoken like this. And it's a bit unhinged, to be honest, in places. There's sort of poetry in places. When I was doing some of the interviews, I honestly was so, I don't even know, I want to say re-triggered. There was some things that I'd never even put into that context of where I had taken on shame. Um, Things like, when we're going for gynecological checkups and stuff like that, and they say things like, that doesn't hurt now. That didn't hurt, did it? There's a good girl. Not much, and you're like, it really hurts actually. And so therefore it must be me because you're saying it doesn't hurt. And actually, I think this is really painful. And then that's where I think we start accepting things like painful sex, and because clearly it's me that's the problem, and there's something wrong with me, and people in those doctor patient sort of, and I mean, not feeling I have agency over myself. I wrote this really long poem called Coming of Agency about that entire, you get that invitation sent to you in the UK. You two would have had it at 16. You're invited for a smear test, for a pap test, and there's people and grown-ups, and you feel so ashamed and embarrassed, and you're told it's you and you have to go along with these things and be good, and that is somewhere that we take on a lot of shame. But in answer to your question, shame is the felt sense. It's an I am, and it's this kind of feeling that we're ashamed of our shame. The more I've written, the more I talk about this, the more I research it, the more I live this subject so deeply. I think we all know what we feel ashamed of, because it's the thing that's sort of just bubbling under the surface all the time. It's the thing that, like, if I had shame, I would will you not to ask me that question. I'd be like, please don't talk about it. Let's just steer away from that subject. I'll try and dance you out of it, right? So we don't have to go there. And it's this horrible, icky, sticky substance that lives within us. And very often with trauma, so I do a lot of, I'm just going to trigger warning this, I'm sure you put it in the notes as well, but I work a lot with victims of sexual assault. A lot. I see a lot of victims of sexual assault. And what's happened quite often in sexual assault is someone has elicited the fawn trauma response because that was the only one appropriate at that time. Couldn't fight them off, couldn't run, probably not possible. Freezing's not going to help. Flopping is really not going to help in this situation. So fawn is the only one available. And then what happens is people are left with so much shame. Why did I kiss them back? Why would I reply to a text message? It was a family member. Why did I continue to go round there at certain occasions and events? Why did I go along with it, in inverted commas, or, you know, I had a drink earlier that evening, so therefore it must be a grey area, and it is never a grey area. So that shame, where we have this sort of confusion as to, almost we think we've colluded in some way, or that we've accepted this, or even somehow we perpetuated what was happening, and it wasn't, it was form.
You can even go further with that though as well, and say, like, a lot of women who've had sexual abuse will feel that the shame, because their bodies cooperate, they might not send a text message back, but they might become lubricated, or they might orgasm, right, when they are raped or something, and that's a body like protecting you. And I was actually with Esther last week, and we were talking specifically about this, specifically about the body cooperating purely to protect us from being hurt, right? So we will get lubricated if someone's going to penetrate you, so that you don't tear. It's simple as that. So it's understanding that it's literally a biological process that your body is undergoing, rather than something that, you know, oh my God, I orgasmed in during my rape, you know. So yeah, I find it really fascinating, this subject, actually, in terms of how that can make us feel after we've gone through something like that.
The shame is a feeling. Does it always relate, because the examples that you've used there, to a bodily experiences? Like, does it always relate directly to an experience that, can you talk to me a bit more about that?
Yeah, a different experience, not physical. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So, for
exactly.
example, I'm a single mum, young daughter. She's 8. She's amazing. But let's just say I said to you both, I have just literally come off a plane. I've been away for a week. She was with her dad skiing. We co-parent, you know, and I could be like, oh, do you know what? I just don't feel like I haven't seen her. I haven't put enough time into her. I'm doing this book tour. You know, I feel a bit crappy. I'm not doing the best job as her mum right now. That's me feeling guilty. That's me being a bit guilty. If I said to you all those things again, and I said to you both, I am a bad mother, I honestly feel unwell saying those words, and I'm making up an example. So the I am can absolutely be where we've taken on this underlying limiting belief, and then we see the world through that lens. When I had my childhood of violence, which is physical, but wasn't always, a lot of mental threat, a lot of actually mental abuse as well with it. And coercive, abusive relationships that might not be physical either, but it's that sort of sense. You believe something about yourself. You know, my limiting belief in my childhood and growing up was that I am bad. I was told I was bad. I was told that I made this person do these things. It must be because of me. These 2 people put on this earth to love me really don't even like me. I'm that bad. So I was seeing the world through this lens of me being bad. And then the relationships I chose from that place, the choices maybe I made thinking that I'm so bad, you know, that was shame. And obviously I don't want anyone to know I'm bad, so what I'm going to do instead is become really perfect. I'm going to be so perfect. I'm going to mask myself. I'm going to be a comedian. I'm going to people please my ass off, because I want everyone to like me and just get nowhere near my shame. Like, we don't want anyone to get anywhere close to our shame.
People pleasing is very much the fawn sort of reaction, isn't it? Do you want to describe that a little bit more about how people pleasing and fawning is so similar, or what it is?
Thank you. Yeah, I actually, so the more and more I've done, I think people pleasing is this sort of, we don't want to get to fawn, right? We don't want to be in a situation where it's conflict, or we're afraid, or we're in a trauma response. I think people pleasing is the thing that we do to desperately try and stop it escalating into that place. So if I felt that I was in a situation where maybe someone was going to become violent towards me, or just be unkind or something like that, I'm more likely to try and dive into meeting the needs that I'm perceiving that they have, dimming myself down, making myself smaller, whatever it might be, because I don't want to get to this place where it's going to escalate. And I think that as women as well, you know, unapologetic is about not saying sorry anymore. Oh, sorry, can I just, oh, sorry, do you mind if, oh, sorry, can I, oh, sorry. And we're told to be a good girl and colour in the lines and all of this stuff. And we're not encouraged to be kind of messy or wild or anything else. And you know, this feeling of pushing it all together, and the people pleasing, I'm absolutely certain now. Even, say you have a narcissistic boss, for example, you know, my mortgage is reliant on this person paying me and staying there, and I know what they're doing isn't right, and I know this is not a great space for me and whatever else, but I really do need this job for whatever reason, I'm thinking. And so guess what, I'm going to people please a lot to try and make this person happy so that I can keep hold of my job. That's another example for you. I want to just give as many as possible. But yeah, I think we don't want it to get that far. So we step in and people please. So we're not faced with that conflict and where we might have a trauma response.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because it's the imprint that then it's not a favorable behavior for somebody. It's not protective. It is, you know, Gabor talks about the consequence of people. You know, there's like he'll look at women and the patterns of behavior and talk about how, you know, the women who carry so much, who take on so much, it's like that burden. It has a physical, it has a mental imprint, but it has a physical imprint, and it can have long-term consequences on autoimmune and other conditions. So what you're describing is making me think of that. It's like this carrying it, just keeping it suppressed, from keeping it away from you, but actually keeping it away from others, and all of those different ways that that can manifest. So in terms of you know, a lot of our audience are in practice, they are working with clients directly. How does that show up then with in the conversations that you're having with your clients? How does that present often? Is it obvious, or is it hidden as much in a therapeutic relationship as it is in some of the examples you've just described?
Thank you, that's a really amazing question. It's such a paradox because I think we do have that feeling. We know the thing that we don't maybe want to talk about or we don't want to face, but I don't think that people, say clients, have maybe got the language around it. And Fawn is a really, as soon as I start to explain that to people, and then potentially why they've made certain choices afterwards, shall we say, after an event, you know, and everyone listening that is a practitioner as well will know that the cure for shame, the only cure for shame, is self-compassion. And so the individuals, when you're working with them, they haven't had the lens of self-compassion. Even when they've been a victim of atrocious sexual assault, they're still holding blame and shame for something that they did or didn't do. I mean, the most unbelievably wicked thing I've ever heard. This beautiful young girl, and she had shame that she'd had a few drinks before, and you know, and she had carried that the whole time. And you know, after a few months was you know, should we just say, using some substances and things like that. And as soon as I started to kind of explain to her, and we did the protocol and did the EMDR work and everything else, and the best part of the job is when you see that person, when the shame is pulled out like a really long weed, when the big roots, you get all of it and it all comes out, then you can be filled up with self-compassion. And it's so hard to give self-compassion to ourselves. Like if one of you, we talked off air, one of my friends' husbands is sadly very terminally ill. We give compassion. I'm giving compassion to her, and it's really easy to do that. When it's ourselves, it's actually quite hard. It's quite hard to turn the lens of compassion onto ourselves and fill ourselves up without help. So for me, that's the most transformative part, is being able to almost pull shame aside, and it's not something wrong with you. Like there is no, you're not broken, there is not something wrong with you. And helping people to understand that shame thrives when you do believe you're alone. Shame wants you to be isolated in some way. It wants you to be not quite fully in, you know, it wants me to put on a mask and pretend. It wants me to yeah, like try and hide my own shame because you're going to reject me. So I think transforming people's stories of themselves in that space, and then when you do EMDR, and you know, like you can kind of see people's history being changed, like the scripts are being written in a different way, and when it's self-compassion that floods in, that's just honestly magical. I feel blessed to do what I do.
Well, that's really clear. That was very visual for me, understanding of how you can kind of get people to understand and embrace their shame in pursuit of self-compassion, and how that can kind of fill up that void of not feeling. Shame is talked about a lot in the context of, so for my, you know, often Araminta and I will bring in our own personal stories or experiences, like body shame. So I know I've done a lot of work from being an obese teenager, you know, still struggle with, you know, in relationship with my body, I guess, my physicality. Does that relate in the same way as the shame that you've been describing? Yes, it's the same principle.
Definitely. So there's two, so there's a section in the book. So in the book, I've gone for everything that's the most shameful. So I've got sex and pleasure. I've got holistic sex coaches in there. I've got fertility. I've gone for, but body is a huge area. I've gone in my divorce lawyers in there, how they weaponize shame in a divorce room. Like why we may be in relationships longer than we otherwise would be because we've been really intimate in all the ways with a person who's now going to weaponize things against us potentially, and other people are going to know stuff about us. But yeah, with regards to body, so I actually interviewed a bariatric surgeon, Dr. David Brown, who's based in Oregon, and because I wanted to really understand, because in the States you pay for all of your surgeries, nothing's free, and it's a really invasive procedure and it's really expensive. So I was like, can we just I was really intrigued about sort of patient stories that he heard, and there's a really amazing story in the book. But he said it's always in childhood. It's always from childhood, the messaging. He had one lady, and again, it's the interview, and it's incredible in the book, that grew up on a farm, was eating her dinner, was younger than my daughter, like 6 or 7, and the father suddenly stormed out, quite a scary man, came back in with the trough that he fed the pigs from, slammed it down, threw her dinner in and said, "You are disgusting and you're going to eat like the pigs do." 6, 7 years old. And so that started a 65-ish plus years horrible relationship for her with food. And she went to him when she was 70. And he said that she was transformed. Like he was getting visibly emotional talking about her a couple of years later. And then when she had gone through this transformation, she'd held shame that entire time. There was something wrong with her the entire time. And it wasn't until they'd had the surgery, you have to work together afterwards. It's not just done forever. But he said she became the woman she was kind of always meant to be. And that's where, again, for him, he got the self-compassion of her being able to nurture and think about the pain that young girl went through, that version of herself, and how she didn't deserve it. Then there's also a story with a lady who was sexualized too early by her father with comments in front of friends. And this was in communist Russia. And was making comments about the shape of her body, and she's about 12 at the time, sort of, that very formative years when your body's beginning to take shape. And so from there on in, she developed a binge eating, disordered eating pattern that lasted for, I think, 35-ish years. I think I was the first person that we kind of really spoke openly about it and did EMDR about it and the work, and she's in such an amazing place now. But she said that she learned to hide within her body because it made her instantly unattractive, makes you safe. Clever body, clever body. You're suddenly laying down, should we say, deposits in different areas because, and I've heard it before with friends that maybe developed too early and you got comments and you felt that you didn't want the comments, you didn't want to how you dress in a certain way or, whatever it may be, because we, through no fault of our own, has suddenly been shamed in a way we don't understand because we're not old enough, but it must have something to do with me. And so in her case, she would binge and restrict so extremely because also when she then went to New Zealand to study, but when she would come back to see her father, if she was overweight, he would also shame her for that. So she would then go through extreme binge and restrict. But she says it's an incredible story. And she says that food was her best friend. It was her only friend. New Year's Eve's, birthdays, it was just her and food would be the thing that would it was her best and worst friend. And so I've really gone, like I say, for every subject that I believe that particularly as women we hold huge amounts of shame, because I appreciate it's privilege to work with me and it's privilege to work with other practitioners, and not everyone has access or are able to. And what I want people to do in these pages is read stories, my own. I've got my own therapist in there. I've waived my own right to anonymity when I used to self-harm when I first met her. So I was a therapist that used to self-harm. How shameful. Like what a nut job. How shameful is that I'm giving advice and helping people, and there was me hacking my face, used to skin pick habitually till it bled twice a day. And I have asked, it's in the book with my own therapist, for her initial impressions of me. And that's in the book because I want anyone that is financially able to or is on the precipice of maybe going to get some help not to let shame block them doing that. So I've waived my own anonymity. It's in there. There's nothing that I'm ashamed of. And so in these pages, in these stories, I just want people to kind of go, oh my goodness, that's me. And if that's me, it means I'm not alone. And the second that you know you're not alone, shame is like losing its power over you. And then you have hope. And so that's what I wanted to create with this book.
It's really interesting because I like how you're looking at the kind of intrinsic drivers of shame, but also those bigger macro factors. Because as you were talking about body shaming in that situation, my experience is somewhat different. As a child of the 80s in the UK, when they took all of the fat out of food and put lots of sugar in and additives, and the start really of the metabolic disease that we see driving the obesity epidemic that we have now in the Western world. For me, it was and also having polycystic ovaries, undiagnosed at that point. There was a point in that sort of development where the weight just was piling on, and then it became food was my friend. But it was the shame came from other people's reaction to my physicality as opposed to some intrinsic. So that ability to kind of understand that it can be driven from inside or experiences, but also from the environment which we've created. If we go back to the 80s and 90s, how people expected, individuals to show up. So all of these different factors that affect that sense of how you define yourself. Because I think that's what I got. The simple sentence that you said, it's the stories that we tell ourselves that begin with I am.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, like I say, mine was I am bad for so long. And so the choices that I made associated with someone that believes themselves to be bad. You can imagine, the challenges I didn't take on, the things that I did or didn't do. But and the I ams that I hear, I am disgusting, I am unlovable, I'm unworthy, I'm unsafe, I'm out of control, I am broken, I'm not enough. I'm weak, I'm helpless, I'm hopeless. The things that are people's I ams are so, like I say, rotten. Shame is rotten, and it's right there in your system, this big root that we have to kind of find and pull forth. And I just want people to know that they are not alone. That's really what the book is about.
You also mentioned, and I think it's quite a useful framework when you're working with people with shame, is the idea of, especially when the shame can be traced back to kind of childhood events, is to look at that child as you are now as an adult. I mean, there's not one of us sat here, that doesn't feel extreme compassion or care when we see either our own children or other people's children who are hurting or upset or, in some way, just crying. We'd all go to that child and cuddle them and look after them and say. So I think if we, even though we have that I am bad or I am disgusting or I am fat or ugly or whatever it is, if we look at that 6-year-old saying that to, or even the 11-year-old, if we saw that 11-year-old now, we'd all go and want to comfort that child, right? And I think that's a really good way of kind of giving ourselves self-compassion, is to reframe and look at ourselves or that young child.
I love that you've said that. Thank you so much. Because I keep a picture of my daughter in my office when she was 7, and for that purpose, to be able to offer the frame for, thinking about your younger self. And then the other exercise, if there are people listening that maybe are interested and want to do some work themselves, is if you're still struggling to give your own younger self compassion, think about a niece, a nephew, a friend's kid, someone that and put them in the exact situation, and run the tape again. And you tell me if there's anything that they did to deserve whatever it was. And the answer is always no. The same with sexual assault. You put a friend of yours, your best friend, in that exact same situation. You tell me if there's a single grey area, because there's not. So those are I love that you said that. Thank you so much, because that is a really great way for people that if they are listening and they aren't able to get help, they can use that technique to try and sort of give you that different lens to develop some self-compassion.
I think that, I hope that people who are listening are able to, because I do think that's a really useful framework. I think sometimes we do get stuck we get stuck, don't we, with that kind of feeling of that I am is so much part of our personality. It's made, 30 odd years of my life has been that I am, whatever that message, that internal criticism is that, and it's impossible to change. But you're right, when you think about it as either your own inner child or definitely someone else's, that we can't help but feel compassion for that person.
It's a bit like that message is such a simple one, but so empowering to say, what are the stories I'm telling myself over and over again? Because we are also neuroplastic. So if we recognize those stories, we can then start to put some more favorable ones. I mean, just from this conversation, I've got a lot coming up, which I'm recognizing I'm going to rewrite. It's just because we just don't often have a simple reflection like that, which is, what is it that we're reaffirming about ourselves to ourselves internally? Because this is the thing, it's not happening. You're not saying it to other people, but it is maybe driving your behaviors. It will be driving your beliefs. It will definitely be dictating how you're showing up in situations and circumstances. Just like I have the same moment of revelation when I started in this field. Once I understood that I had a vagus nerve and how that was responsible for so much of, how I presented, you can't unlearn that. And I think there's the same principle with the question that you're asking there, is to first recognize, and then that visual of kind of pulling that from its roots and replacing that with some compassion, with tools like, thinking about that inner child and reflecting on, if you can't do it for yourself, how you would treat somebody else, is a really good start point, even for people that can't access the help as you've described. Really interesting conversation. So the premise of the book then is to get people to kind of just to be aware of this, aware of what happens, because I'm not even sure that it's necessarily conscious for a lot of people. I think this might even be
this is the thing. It is subconscious most times. It's this felt sense rather than a, necessarily like our little anxiety chatter that we've all got going on, the inner critic or, any of those things. It is often this sort of almost this system that's driving us around, and then we'll have the chatter about something else. And I just love everything you said just then. It's so I had a bit of a, let's just say I was very unapologetic with the publishers that I would not write a how-to. Absolutely not, because shame, that would be really disingenuous of me to do that. And you cannot just click your fingers 3 times, turn around and, do something and shame's gone. And I'm not going to put 10 steps in for that, because that's not authentic. Like I say, there are incredible books like Gabor, like Nicola Pera. There are amazing books that you can work through the stages. Obviously Body Keeps the Score. There's fantastic books that you can work through that are how-tos. But I really firmly believe, and again, I did all the vagal nerve work, we have to get like deep under the bonnet and deep into shame first, and kind of have that sense of, oh, it's not just me and I'm not alone, and then go and find the thing that works for you. Inner child, breathing, somatic therapies, amazing EMDR work, or whatever it is that's going to work for you. But I really do think we have to start, kind of surfacing this stuff first, and realizing again, like I say, that we are in community here, and shame wants us to disconnect. Shame, like I say, is keeping us isolated, and there just really is something on the other side. I say that I firmly believe this. I've had 2 lives, and one I was shameful because I was full of this shame that drove all of these behaviors. And now I'm completely, borderline unhinged, but I'm shameless. Like I just am so free. And I know that because I just don't think about, I've got wet hair, I've just got a plane, I'm doing a podcast with you two. I love what you do. I've been waiting for this for months. I'm not putting the glam on or anything like that. I'm so passionate about doing this work and getting it out there. And I honestly believe this is going to be a movement. I mean, I write in the book that I believe that shame is the last bastion of the patriarchy. And I do believe that. I think it's a way of making us fight each other as women. I think it's a way of, I don't want to be too much, because what might you two think of me, and then what might happen. But yet none of us know what too much is. Not one person can tell me what it is, but we're all afraid of it. If I'm too much, then you might not like me and I'll be rejected. But yet, you know, and I better be a bit smaller because that makes me more digestible to this person. And but you know, I want you to shine, queen, but oh, not like that. You know, there's all of this conflicting stuff all of the time, and shame is underneath all of it, just going absolutely brilliant. And the more they do this, the more they just stay, you know, that little bit smaller, and shame's got more control. So I feel, as you probably just heard then, very passionately about this being out in the world and just having people be able to see themselves in these pages. Even if it's not your exact story, it is all of our stories. And yeah, and have it as a liberation.
I think it's so important because I think actually you kind of touched on it earlier in this conversation, but about if there isn't someone like you leading the way around these conversations, these elephants in the room, whether it's, you know, sex or painful sex or, you know, eating disorders or body image like issues or divorce or any of these themes or topics that you talk about, if we don't talk about them, if no one will talk about them, it will never change, right? It will always stay the same. And I also worry that even in a therapist's office, like I work with some sex therapists and stuff, and often you might have like years and years of therapy with someone, and not once in a 10-year therapy relationship will sex ever even come up. Yet you're having horrendous sex that whole time with your partner, and it's like, why? It's because sex is the shameful topic that you wouldn't talk about. But there you're sitting with a therapist where you're supposed to be able to talk about everything and anything, but those topics that are shameful are still shameful, even in those safe spaces.
Oh, I really,
If you think, I mean, I was also going to birth, you know, when you're talking about shame, like in patriarchy, the systems that are inherently about women, but not designed by women or for women or to empower, but actually to, you know, there's so much that needs rewriting to reframe it in a way that removes the shame.
yeah, I've
Yeah.
got the fertility expert in the book. She's incredible. She's a powerhouse. And she talks about how she has to advocate in particular for women of colour and women of bigger bodies to even be her PCOS sufferers, where it's evidently PCOS, but the doctor is going, no, it's not. Cut out gluten. And you're like, no, really. Like, and then all the symptoms are there. And yeah, how she's, you know, advocating and changing. But thank you for saying what you did. I really do think that I'm sort of so far, I've drunk so much of the Kool-Aid now. I'm so shameless that I just kind of have to do this. And I want everyone to know that it is possible. And so in the sex and pleasure section, there's a huge interview with this amazing holistic sex coach about sort of when is it that we start saying this is really unsatisfactory, or there must be more than this, or why am I in pain, or, you know, I'm disconnected to my body, and what's wrong with me, and all of, you know, again, what's wrong with me, shame. And I write again very, very openly, very shamelessly about me going on all of these female sexual empowerment courses, which is what I was trying to do at the end of my marriage, to try and find anything that might help my marriage work, which it didn't, but it helped me in a way. And to your point, I was a coach and a therapist. I've been on every bloody course you can imagine about all the stuff, and yet sex was still never mentioned. It's almost this like slight sort of like kooky underbelly of like, oh, don't go down there, you've gone a bit mad. But you know, I'm in this group of women in this yoga studio, talk about it in great detail, and that made me realize the universal truth of that was that nobody felt able to ask for what they wanted. Nobody, and a lot of people didn't even know what their own needs were. And then the other one was that you just felt you were taking too much time in anything, you know, or I had to be perfect first. Well, I couldn't possibly receive some pleasure in any regard from you, or even a massage or whatever, because I haven't cleaned up or had a wax or done this or been, you know, just being able to sort of enjoy space and receive is almost impossible. And, you know, we went through all of these amazing exercises. It was so revealing, and it really also, until that point, and I was like 30, had my kid, I'm like 37, I'd guess, I didn't even know what was possible, and the difference between sex and pleasure, sensuality and sexuality even. I mean, and I didn't know that that was even a possibility and available to me, or how to ask for certain things. And you know, it took, and so that's why it's all in there, because I really want people to be able to read that and be like, okay, right, let's you know, get out there and also be able to have some tools and be able to talk about this properly.
So important.
This is what you describe there, is that credit and debit thing as well, that I'm seeing really is a prevailing trail, especially with women and high achieving women. To get some credit, you know, the debit credit piece, you've got to put so much in the bank before you will allow yourself the opportunity. And relaxation has now become something that you plan as recreational rather than just a part of the routine. You know, I have to think about lots of my colleagues in this field, but also in my old world of consulting. It rings true. It's never talked about in those terms, but it is definitely evident in behaviors and where time gets spent and energy and how it all you know, comes out in the wash. I'm going to ask you the question that we ask all of our podcast guests. We live in a world with lots of fear and doubt and angst and anger and anxiety. All of these things prevail, whether you look at the kind of macro level, geopolitical, climatic, you know, just the kind of we know is happening at a really big picture level, right down to societies and communities, but down to families and friends and colleagues, and then, you know, ourselves. This kind of happens across a ripple effect, forward and back across those different planes. Against that backdrop, if you had a single lever for change, one thing that would be a catalyst for a movement in the right direction, what would that lever be? What would that button be that you could push to create the change that we need to see?
I can honestly tell you, and this with no ego, I've done it. It's the book. I've done it. That's the lever. And it's because it's other people's story and mine, an interview. I've done it. It's a movement. It's not a book. It's a movement.
Make sure that we link the book in.
Oh yeah, that's
Still need to read the book and make sure that we do that so we can be that catalyst for change. Yeah.
Annalie, it's been a real pleasure chatting today. I've definitely taken a lot from the conversation. I hope our listeners have too. Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you both.